Consultant Dina Sayegdal. Dina, what does the jury do, in your opinion, to decide who they believe when there are different words coming from two different witnesses about what happened during really a very short incident?
It's interesting because there's video of this, but there's not video of the crucial moment. And there's testimony, but like you said, there's a lot of different testimony. So partly how they assess credibility is how any of us would assess credibility. What did the person say on the stand? Were they consistent in their story? For example, the one witness who said that he walked maybe stridently but didn't kind of run, is that what the jury saw with their video, or do they think it was a jog? And if they thought it was a jog, maybe they'll discount the rest of his testimony because they think he wasn't that accurate. It's things like that. And then, as we know, with the wife and the defendant himself, their credibility is most important because their story goes to not just that final altercation, but really everything that led up to it too. And so that's going to broaden out in terms of all of the elements, who they will believe more.
Right. Absolutely agree with you. And the other piece of this, Dina, when they go back and they're deliberating, all of our viewers are pretty adamant the video shows one thing or the other, either self-defense or not, period. And you can assume when you've got a jury of 12 that they are back there with that same conversation. And you may have one juror who's convinced, I saw that video, it's self-defense, and another may say, absolutely not. There was no self-defense. He just shot him in the head. So how is it possible, I guess is a better way to say, that this jury may have very differing opinions of what really happened based on the evidence presented?
Absolutely. I would think that this probably will be a little bit of a longer deliberation because of this, because it's so unclear at the end in terms of the video and the testimony. So it's a lot for them to parse through. In terms of their opinions, we at least hope they don't come in with fixed opinions. That's what jury selection is, trying to weed out those people. So they will just look at the facts of the case. And at that point, I mean, there is always a possibility there's a mistrial, that there's somebody whose opinion cannot be changed through deliberation. But we hope that they look at this evidence. They may have to look at it many times. They may ask, to see the video again, but that they will be able to deliberate and come to a consensus as to whether or not it was reasonable for him to believe his life was in imminent danger, and whether or not the prosecution met their burden, which the defense attorney did a good job in his closing argument, reiterating that it's really their burden to prove that.
And did he reasonably fear for his life? Let's listen together, Dina, to some of the evidence presented. And this is what the defendant thought based on testimony versus what Jason Clearman's wife testified to. Let's watch.
So as my husband is approaching the bicyclist is, he's looking at me, I'm looking at him, and he had these really dark, cold eyes, and he was staring at me.
And then what happens?
And then I see him pull out his hand, and then I see a gun in his hand.
And then what happens?
And then I shout out to my husband, he has a gun.
What happens?
My husband didn't hear me.
What's your husband do?
All I saw was this man's eyes and the gun. And then I knew he was going to shoot my husband. I could just feel it. And then he pulled the trigger on his head. And then he looked at me. He kept looking at me. Actually, he never took his eyes off of me. And I felt like he was contemplating on shooting me next.
So after your husband is shot, there's a pause. Is that what you're telling me?
There was a pause.
Is this the second vehicle that you believed or perceived was a threat that you just testified to?
Yes.
All right. And you didn't observe anybody get out that vehicle at any point, correct?
I was fixated on the direct threat that was in front of me because I just perceived them at this point to be threats. The direct threat was right in front of me, and he brandished, he raised his hands, drawn up from his midsection, so it appeared that he had an object in his hand. And at this point, I couldn't tell what the object was because I wasn't fixated on it. I was assessing, different things at this time. 2 possible threats from the vehicle, one that was in front of me, in which I, first, tried to escape forward into, and yeah, and this other threat that was behind that vehicle, possibly in that car.
All right, you just heard the defendant's perception versus the wife. Does this really boil down to, Dina, at the end of the day, which of these 2 witnesses the jury unanimously believes?
Yes, I think so. In a way that maybe a lot of trials don't, because they both did testify, and the jury can really take a look at that testimony to see who they think is more credible.
Absolutely. All right. I do need to let us know, breaking news, the jury has a question. So we're going to take an opportunity to take a break before they come back in the courtroom, and then we'll be taking you live to hear what kind of question the jury has in this case. We'll be right back.